When Noriko heard the news of her sister and brother-in-law's deaths, she went to the funeral intent on taking Satoru in, even though she was single. Satoru was the one thing her sister would have been worried about, and Noriko was determined to do whatever she could for him. Relatives from her brother-in-law's side of the family made a token appearance at the funeral and left without touching on the issue of what was to be done with Satoru at all. And, on her side of the family, there was no one else willing to take the decision to have him. When Noriko said she would, some of them were worried, saying a woman on her own might not be able to manage. Most of them suggested putting the boy in foster care. Satoru was her sister's and brother-in-law's child. If he had no relatives, that would be one thing, but since there was a relative who had the financial resources to take him in, she would be shirking her duty if she put him into foster care, so she insisted, in spite of the resistance. The funeral ended, the state was settled, and soon afterwards, Noriko adopted Satoru. She told him, "You're going to find out eventually, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you now. Satoru, you are not related by blood to your father or mother." Reality is reality. That was her way of thinking, but when she saw the look on Satoru's face when she told him, she realized she'd make a big mistake. Satoru grew pale, and his face contorted in shocks. It was the same blank look he had had after his parents' death. As he approached the two coffins set up in the local community center, it looked as if he had lost everything he had in the world. Even a tactless person like her knew instantly that in a matter of seconds, because of her, Satoru had lost everything all over again. When his friends came for the wake, he cried for the first time. Afterwards, the expression on his face slowly returned to normal. The realization that she had done something unspeakable upset her terribly. "Then, who are my real father and mother?" Satoru asked. "Your real father and mother are indeed my sister and her husband. The others are just your birth parents." Obviously, Satoru had done nothing wrong, but still she spoke like this, as if scolding him. She was so confused, she couldn't control herself. "Your real parents are my sister and her husband. Your birth parents merely gave birth to you. They were utterly responsible, and they were going to let you die when you were a baby." This had been Noriko's first big case as a judge. The couple had been quite young. It was more than a criminal case of child abandonment. It was so extreme that the birth parents had been charged with attempted murder. They'd stopped feeding the baby until he was no longer able to even cry. Then had wrapped him in a black plastic bag and thrown him out on the day the rubbish was due to be collected. A neighbor had grown suspicious when he spotted the plastic bag moving and ripped it open. The couple had been walking away when the neighbor reported them. The trial ended, and Satoru's birth parents were given the prison terms they deserved, but there was nowhere to place Satoru. The only option left was an orphanage. The whole case had almost been too much for Noriko, imposing a punishment that befitted the crime that she could do, but it did nothing to secure a future for the innocent baby. Her sister had been the one who helped her cope with this ordeal. It was a major case, and her sister had been following it since the start. "People should really go through a vetting process in order to get married," Noriko had grumbled at the time. "If couples with kids were all like you and your husband, sis, then this type of crime would never happen." Just as she said this, she felt a cold trickle of sweat run down her back. After her sister had got married, she'd found out she wasn't able to have children. The criticism from her husband's family had been hurtful, and her husband had distanced himself from them. Yet, even so, her sister remained anxious. It was soon after this that Noriko's sister told her that she wanted to adopt Satoru, just before he was due to be sent to an orphanage. "It's because you told me we would be good parents," she had said, smiling. Satoru had been devastated by the news. "Your birth parents just gave you birth. That's all," Noriko had reassured him. "Your real parents were my sister and brother-in-law, so it was my duty to take you in." Noriko had said this to put Satoru's mind at ease, but she had instantly regretted it. Using the word duty, it sounded so stiff and formal. "Satoru, you don't need to worry about a thing," she had added, in an attempt to make up for it. The criticism her male relatives had of Noriko, that she needed to be more careful about what she said, was spot on. From the very beginning, She'd got it all wrong with Satoru, telling him things he never should have. That's why she can't find a husband, they had said, and she thought now they were probably quite right. At the time, she'd had a boyfriend, but soon after she adopted Satoru, they split up. Her boyfriend seemed upset that she hadn't consulted him before making the decision. Why didn't you talk to me about this? He had reproached her, and she had explained that since Satoru was her nephew, she hadn't thought she needed to. At that moment, the barriers had gone up, and she knew it. It seemed that, once again, she'd been incredibly insensitive. Learning to have some insight into other people's sensitivities was, she concluded, more difficult than mattering the law. The cat that Satoru had owned ended up being taken in by a distant relative. This relative, such a distant relation that Noriko didn't feel at all close to him, had tousled Satoru's hair and said, "Don't worry, everyone in our family loves cats, so we'll take good care of him." Satoru had given him a cheerful look and nodded. Not once since the day his parents died had Satoru looked at her in that way. Occasionally, this relative would send them a photo of the cat, but before long, these letters became few and far between, though the annual New Year's card from them always had a photo of Hachi printed on it and a short message, "Hachi's doing well." The family were considerate enough to let them know when Hachi died, and when Satoru went to visit the grave, they welcomed him warmly. Maybe Satoru would have been happier if they had taken him in, too. Even now, the thought occurred to her sometimes. When all the other relatives had hesitated to take in this child to whom they had no blood ties, this family had said, "If only we had the means, we'd have liked to help out." They had other children already, quite a lot in those days. "It's a question of money, they'd said, smiling awkwardly. But couldn't they have taken Satoru if Noriko had helped them out financially? Was taking him in herself just egotistical? All about her not wanting to give up the one thing her sister had left behind? She had thought about all these things for the longest time. Noriko had started to weep. "I think you would have been much happier if your relative in Kokura had adopted you." "Why?" Satoru blinked in surprise. "He's a nice man and everything, but I'm glad you took me in on Noriko." Now it was her turn to ask why. "Well, you're my mother's younger sister. You're the one who can tell me the most about my parents. But right after they died, I went and told you that awful thing." Satoru cut her off. "I was pretty shocked when I heard that, I grant you. But because you told me that, I was able to appreciate just how happy I'd been with them." Noriko looked dubious. Satoru laughed. "I never ever thought they were my real parents. That's how much they treated me like their own child. Though my birth parents didn't want me, another man and woman loved me that much. I mean, you don't find such incredible love very often. That's why I'm so happy." Satoru had said this to me, his face beaming many times. "I get it. Having had Satoru take me in as his cat, I think I felt as lucky as he did. Strays, by definition, had been abandoned or left behind, but Satoru rescued me when I broke my leg. He made me the happiest cat on earth. I'll always remember those 5 years we had together, and I'll forever go by the name Nana, the name that, let's face it, it's pretty unusual for a male cat. The town where Satoru grew up, too. I would remember that. And the green seedlings swaying in the fields. The sea, with its frighteningly loud roar, Mount Fuji looming over us. How cozy it felt on top of that boxy TV. That wonderful lady cat, Momo. That nervy but earnest hound, Doramaru. That huge white furry which swallowed up cars into its stomach. The dogs in the pet holding area, wagging their tails at Satoru. That full-mouthed chinchilla telling me Guduraku. The land in Hokkaido stretching out forever. Those vibrant purple and yellow flowers by the side of the road. The field of pampas grass like an ocean. The horses chomping on grass. The bright red berries on the mountainous trees. The shades of red on the mountainous that Satoru taught me. The stench of slender white birds. The graveyard, which is so wide open, vista. The bouquet of flowers in rainbow colors. The white heart-shaped bottom of the deer. That huge double rainbow growing out of the ground. I would remember this for the rest of my life. In Kosuke, in Yosemite, in Suji and Shikako, and above all, the one who brought up Satoru and made it possible for us to meet, Noriko. Could anyone be happier than this? It must have made you sad that we had to move all the time because of my work. Every time you made friends, I had to tear you away. But I made new friends wherever we went. I was sad to say goodbye to Kosuke, but in junior high, I met Yosemine, and in high school, I met Sui and Shikako. Our OMI meetings didn't go so well with any of them, but they all said they'd take Nana for me. I've been so lucky to have this many people willing to take care of my darling cat. Satoru reached out his thin hand and covered Noriko's fingers. None of the people who offered to take Nana were right for him, and in the end, you took him in for me, on Noriko. Noriko was still looking down at her lap when her shoulders began to shake. And even more than that, you found my parents for me, before adopting me yourself. So how could I not be happy? So you shouldn't be crying there, Noriko. Instead of sobbing like that, it would be better to keep a smile on your face till the end, and then I'm sure you'll be happier. Satoru began to stay overnight at the hospital more often. I'll be back in a few days, he'd say this, tickle me on the head, and leave the house, bag in hand. Gradually, the amount of time he stayed away grew longer. He'd say he'd go in 3 or 4 days, but then would not come back for a week, or he would say a week and return 10 days later. The clothes he had brought from Tokyo no longer fitted him. His trousers became so loose you could fit a couple of fists inside the waist. He started wearing a wool cap at home. I don't know why, but his hair was getting thinner than ever, along with his body, and then one day he was completely bald. I thought maybe they'd saved his hair off at the hospital, but he'd gone to the barbers himself and got them to do it. One day, as Satoru was preparing for another stay in the hospital, he put a photograph into his suitcase, a photo of the two of us, taken on one of our trips, which he'd always kept beside his bed back in Tokyo. And then it struck me. I stood up on my hind legs and scratched at my basket in the corner of the living room and meowed. Come on, don't you need to bring this with you? Satoru closed the clasp on his suitcase and smiled at me with a forlorn look. I guess you'd like to come with me, wouldn't you, Nana? Well, of course. Satoru opened the basket door and I hurried inside. Then he turned the basket so the door was against the wall. Just a second now. How am I supposed to get out? Enough with the silly jokes. You're very well behaved, so I know you'll be a good boy from now on. Hold on there. I clawed hard at the inside of the basket. What are you talking about, Satoru? Satoru stood up with his suitcase. He opened the front door without taking my basket with him. Wait, wait! I scratched even harder at the basket, my fur on end, and yelled. I know you'll be a good boy. Shut up! A good boy? What a load of hogwash! I'll never ever let you leave me behind. You be a good boy now. What? Come back here. Come back right this minute. Take me with you. It's not like I want to leave you. I love you, you silly cat. I love you too, you dummy. As if shaking off my yells, Satoru slowly left the room and closed the door firmly behind him. Come back. Come back. Come back. Come back. I'm your cat till the bitter end. I screamed as loud as I could, but the door didn't open. I cried and cried and cried and cried until my voice was completely hoarse. After I'm not sure how long, when the room had turned dark, the door quietly clicked open. It was Noriko. She moved my basket away from the wall and opened the door. I stayed in the corner of the basket, sulking, and a small hand reached gingerly in. With the tip of her finger, she touched my head, scratched behind my ears, softly stroked my throat. For someone who wasn't good with cats, she had come on quite well. Satoru said to take good care of you, since you're his darling cat. I know that I'm precious to him, that much I know. I put out some food for you. I crumbled some chicken breast on top too. Satoru said to pamper you today. If he thinks that will make up for leaving me behind, then he's got another thing, Mika. Satoru's room is kind of small, but it's a private room and very comfortable, not hospital-like at all. The nurses are all really kind too. Satoru said he wants to spend his final days quietly. Noriko's voice was trembling as she stroked me. So Satoru said to tell Nana not to worry at all. Maybe I didn't need to worry, but without me there with him, it must have been just awful. As soon as he got in the room, he put up the photo of the two of you, right next to his bed, just like at home. So he said, everything's fine. Nonsense! Which is better, a photo of me or the real flesh and blood cat? The answer's obvious. Of course, having the real me there, warm and velvety soft me, is better. I licked Noriko's hand. At first, she hadn't liked it when I licked her. She said my tongue was rough. Since you're crying, I lick later, when I feel so inclined. I mean, you went to all the trouble of topping it with chicken breast and all. Other than eating and using the litter tray, I pretty much stayed holed up in Satoru's room. Whenever I was alone in the house and the door opened, I leapt out, hoping it was him, but it was always Noriko. I would let my tail droop and head back to Satoru's room. I wasn't at all embarrassed about letting it droop when I couldn't see him, because it was only natural to feel sad. It seemed that Satoru had asked Noriko to take me for a walk every now and then, but if I couldn't go out with Satoru, I didn't see the point of treading with the soft patch of my possum streets covered with freezing white snow. Satoru didn't seem to get it, how important he was to me. Every day, I stared out of the window. Hey, Satoru, how are things where you are? There was an awful snowstorm today, a total whiteout outside the window. I couldn't even see the lights of the city. Was it the same where you are? Now it's sunny, not a cloud in the sky, but the clear blue sky looks really cold. Today, the puffed-up sparrows on the power line set a new record for humidity. There are some thin clouds and it isn't snowing, but I'll bet it's freezing outside. I saw a bright red car driving down the road, the color of the berries on the mountainous, the color you taught me. But I get the feeling the mountainous berry is a deeper color, the kind that takes your breath away. Humans are good at making colors, but they can't seem to reproduce the power of natural ones. One day, Noriko walked into Satoru's room. Nana, let's go and visit Satoru. Come again? Satoru seems really lonely without you, so I went ahead and asked if I could bring you. The doctor said you can't come inside, but when Satoru's going for his walk in the garden, we can see him. Bravo, Noriko! Noriko held out the basket and scurried inside. We drove there in the silver van. Noriko had been using it the whole time Satoru had been in hospital, apparently, and this was the first time I'd been in it since the last journey Satoru and I had taken together. By car, it took all of 20 minutes. Satoru was this close by. If it were just me and Satoru in the van, I would have opened the basket instantly and slipped out, but since it was Noriko, I stayed quietly inside. And used to thinking about things from a cat's perspective, she put the basket on the floor in the back, so my only view was the van's dark interior. You stay here like a good boy, and I'll fetch Satoru. As instructed, I waited like a good boy. Of course I did. I'm a wise cat. I know what to do in any and all situations. Finally, Noriko returned and lifted the basket out of the van. The hospital was a tranquil place in a quiet neighborhood. Beyond the parking lot was a soft, snowy field. The trees and benches were decorated with a thick layer of snow. I imagined the grass and flower beds asleep underneath. There were chairs and tables on a roof-tin terrace projecting out from the building, and this place seemed to be used as a rest area on days when the weather wasn't good. And then, on the terrace, in a wheelchair, was Satoru. I was impatient to leap out of the basket, but because Noriko was holding on to it, I refrained from unlocking the door myself. Nana! Satoru had a down jacket on, and was all puffy, but he was even thinner and paler than the last time I'd seen him. But then, a bit of color came to those ghostly cheeks. I don't think I'm being conceited if I say that I was the one who brought that warm red glow to his face, but what do you all think? I'm so glad you came. Satoru half rose from his wheelchair. Like me, he couldn't stand the distance still separating us. I wanted to open up the basket and leap straight out, but Noriko still didn't know I couldn't lock it myself. I sprang into Satoru's lap as soon as I could. He pressed me close in his thin arms, unable to speak. I purred till my throat hurt, rubbing the top of my head over and over against his body. The two of us were so very, very well matched, so don't you think it was strange we were kept apart from each other? I wanted to lie in his arms forever, but pretty soon the piercing cold became too much for Satoru in his condition. Satoru, Noriko said hesitatingly. Satoru knew what she meant, but found it hard to let me go. I keep the photo of the two of us next to my bed. Noriko told me, so I'm not lonely. That's not true. In fact, it's such an obvious lie that Emma, the Lord of Hell, who pulls out the tongues of liars, would be laughing too hard to do any tongue pulling. You stay well, Nana. One more firm squeeze around my middle that nearly brought the stuffing out of me, and Satoru finally let me go. And Noriko surging, I stepped straight back into my basket, ever the good boy. Just a second, I'll put Nana in the car. Noriko left me on the back seat onto the van before hurrying back to Satoru. That was my moment. With my right paw, I flipped the basket door open. I sat down low in the driver's seat and waited for Noriko to return. It was almost an hour later when she did. There was a light dusting of snow swirling in the air, and Noriko was hunching up her shoulders against the cold as she walked. The door on the driver's side snapped open. Nana, she chased after me, but when it comes to playing tag, humans are no match for four-legged animals. I avoided her easily and raced out into the parking lot. Come back here! Noriko's voice was nearly a scream. Sorry, but I'm not going to listen to you, because I'm a wise cat who knows what to do in any and all situations. When I had reached a safe distance, I stopped and turned to look, focusing my vision hard on her flailing, distant figure. Then I put up my tail cheerily. See you. Bye. I scampered off into the snowy landscape and never looked back. Now then, no matter how proud a stray cat I might be, winter in Hokkaido is pretty formidable. The snow in Tokyo should never be called by the same name as the snow that falls here. So heavy sometimes you can't see your nose in front of your face. Here's where all those walks I'd taken with Satoru came in useful. The town cats I ran across were great at slipping into shelter spaces to avoid the cold, and, of course, there were some heroic cats in the neighborhood around the hospital as well. That being the case, since I was always prepared to go back to being a stray, why wouldn't I survive? Using the hospital as my base, I located several spots where I could keep out of the cold. As might be expected with large buildings, there were many cracks and gaps, in garage and warehouse walls, for instance, that a cat could slip through. The areas below the flooring in people's houses and underneath their boilers were both comfortable places. Sometimes another cat had beaten me to it, but perhaps the severe winter cold helped foster a spirit of cooperation, and more often than not, we would end up sharing the spot rather than disputing it. I'd heard that the citizens of Hokkaido were particularly kind. Noriko had told Satoru that it was quite common for people to pick up drunks and travelers and let them stay in their home. Sure enough, I experienced how that principle operated in the cat world too. The local cats showed me where to scavenge for food, for example. Houses and shops where they'd give you tasty leftovers, and a park where a cat lover might feed you. There was a small supermarket near the hospital as well, and I often charmed my way into catching treats there. And, of course, there was always hunting. The cold made the puffed up birds and mice move nice and slowly, so they were easy prey. The cats around me thought I was a little odd for having intentionally given up the easy life for one as a stray. Why do that? They often asked. It's such a waste, they concluded. I must be a little mad. But for me, there was something more important at stake. The snow began to let up, and night was yet to fall. I crept around to the side of the warehouse from which the hospital was visible, and yes, just as I thought, Satoru, wheeling himself in his wheelchair, was coming out of the front door. Tail straight up, I scampered over to him. His face broke into a tearful smile. Then he said, You need to go home now. You know what will happen if you try to catch me, don't you? I'll scratch you, up and down and all over, until you look like they could play checkers on your face. Satoru could see I was worried and said, I give up. Turns out, when I escaped from Noriko, they had totally freaked out. Satoru was apparently so shocked when he heard I'd run away he broke out in a fever. Noriko looked for me every day on the streets, but naturally, I was too stealthy for the likes of her to find me. A few days passed, and when I turned up again in front of Satoru, despondently sitting on the terrace, boy was he surprised. His jaw dropped so far he looked like Donald Duck. See? Didn't I tell you I'd stay with you to the end? Satoru reached out from his wheelchair to grab me. I flailed around like a freshly caught salmon and slipped out of his grasp. When I looked up at him from a safe spot on the floor a few yards away, Satoru's face looked like that of a child on the verge of tears. Nana, you're being foolish, he said. You came to say hello, didn't you? I am Satoru's one and only cat, and Satoru is my one and only pal. And a proud cat like me wasn't about to abandon his pal. If living as a stray was what it took to be Satoru's cat to the very end, then bring it on. When Noriko heard the news from Satoru, she huffed and puffed and jumped in her car. I'm not sure where she found it, but she brought over a huge cage used to trap animals, left it in the garage and went back home. As if I would be stupid enough to get caught in a contraption like that. For a while, I couldn't trust the hospital staff either. Apparently, acting on instructions from Noriko and Satoru, they tried to coax me over, with the sole intention of capturing me. They saw me appear whenever Satoru happened to be on the terrace, only to leave as soon as he went inside, so I think they finally understood. After that, I became Satoru's commuting cat. On days when it wasn't snowing, Satoru would come outside for a short while, and we'd spend some precious moments together. I chewed on the crunches and chicken breast he brought me and curled up tightly in his lap. Satoru would tickle me behind my ears and under my chin, and I'd purr for him, just like when we first met. Mr. Miyawaki? The nurse was calling him back inside. She was about the same age as Noriko, but quite a bit rounder. Okay, I'll be in soon. Satoru held me tightly to his body. Whenever we parted, he would always give me a huge hug. I could tell from the way his thin arms clung around me that this might be the last time. I licked Satoru's hands, each on the knuckle, and leapt down from his lap. By the way, when I became a commuting cat, some of the other cats I got to know received extra perks as well. The hospital staff and visitors started to leave little snacks around the yard for me. Each one thought they were the only ones stealthily leaving me food, but actually there must have been a whole lot of them. I couldn't eat it all myself, but took some to all the cats who'd been kind to me to repay them. It snowed for several days in a row. When it finally let up, I sidled over to the side of the warehouse where I had a clear view of the hospital's front entrance. It was the first sunny day in a while, yet Satoru didn't appear on the terrace. When the sun began to set, Noriko pulled up in the silver van. Her face looked pale, her hair disheveled. I pattered up to her, but she said simply, "Sorry, Nana, you'll have to wait," and walked swiftly inside. In the hospital room, all Noriko could do was watch. The waves on the ECG machine were getting steadily weaker. She could just see the figure of Satoru lying on the bed, between the members of staff clustered around him. As Noriko tried to slide between them, a nurse brushed against the bedside cabinet and two framed photos, a family photo with Noriko and one of Nana, fell crashing to the floor. They were hurriedly retrieved and put back in place. Just then, a cat's meowing from outside resounded around the ward. Meowing and meowing. "Can I?" Noriko spoke before thinking. "Can I bring the cat? Satoru's cat. She'd never made such an absurd request in her life. Please, let me bring in the cat." "Please, don't ask," the matron scolded. "If you ask, then we'll have to say no." As if repelled by a cannon, Noriko raced out of the ward, ignoring the "no running in the corridor" sign. She clattered down the stairs, two at a time. Then she burst through the front entrance. "Nana! Nana!" Nana leapt out of the darkness like a silver bullet. He jumped into Noriko's arms and snuggled into her body. Then Noriko raced back up to the ward. "Satoru!" The staff were reaching the final stages of the procedure. Noriko elbowed her way through them to Satoru's side. "Satoru, it's Nana!" Satoru's closed eyelids quivered, as if fighting against gravity. They slowly lifted. Unable to move his head, his eyes searched from side to side. Noriko clasped Satoru's hand and placed it gently on the top of Nana's small head. Satoru's lips moved faintly. She thought she heard him say, "Thank you." The electromagnetic screen flatlined. Nana nuzzled the top of his head up and down against Satoru's lifeless hand. "I'm afraid he's passed away," the attending doctor said, and the matron added, "We can't have you bringing a cat in here. You'll have to take him out now." Suddenly, the atmosphere seemed to lighten. Some of the nurses even gave a small smile. And then, as though something loose had finally been wrenched open, the floodgates broke. Not since she was a little girl had Noriko wept with such abandon. The staff members finished unplugging the monitors and took them away. "Make sure you take the cat outside immediately," the matron reminded her, before swiftly leaving the room. Noriko's throat throbbed until she couldn't weep anymore. Suddenly, she felt a rough tongue licking the tops of her fingers. Gently, ever so gently. "Let's take Satoru back, Nana." As if in response, Nana licked her hand again. "Nana, is it okay for me to believe that Satoru was happy?" Nana nuzzled his forehead against Noriko's palm, and then once more began to lick, ever so delicately.